girl left behind without a name until a farmer's market vendor gives her everything she never had. Frank Miller was arranging the last boxes of mangoes when he saw the girl. She was sitting on the cold ground of the farmer's market, between the stalls that were already closing, wearing dirty clothes and barefoot. Her big, frightened eyes followed every movement around her, as if waiting for someone who never came. It was Thursday, almost 7 in the evening, and the farmer's market in Oakland was emptying out. Frank had been selling fruit there for 48 years and had never seen such a young child alone at that hour. The girl looked about 5 years old and clutched a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. "Where's your mom, little one?" Frank crouched beside her, removing the straw hat he wore every day. The child looked up but didn't answer. She just held out the paper. Frank took it carefully and tried to read the words smudged by moisture. "She has no name. Take care of her as best you can." Frank's heart tightened. In over 2 decades working at the market, he'd seen a lot, but this was different. The girl shivered in the evening breeze that was starting to roll in. "What do you mean, no name?" he murmured to himself, looking back at the child. She just shook her head, confirming what was written on the paper. Frank felt a lump in his throat. How could someone abandon a child without even giving her a name? "Come on, I'll take you home," he said, holding out his hand. But the girl shrank back, pressing closer to the stall's post. Frank realized she was scared and tried a different approach. "Are you hungry?" he asked, grabbing a banana from the nearest box. The child's eyes lit up, and she nodded. Frank peeled the fruit and handed it to her. She ate with a heartbreaking hunger, as if she hadn't eaten in days. As she ate, Frank wondered what to do. He couldn't leave a child there, but he also didn't know how to handle the situation. He lived alone in a small rented apartment and barely made ends meet selling fruit. "What am I going to call you if you don't have a name?" he asked, more to himself. The girl finished eating and just stared at him. Frank noticed she had a star-shaped birthmark on her right arm. "Star," he said, smiling for the first time since he'd seen her. "I'll call you Star, okay?" For the first time, the girl gave a shy smile and nodded. Frank finished packing up his things, lifted Star onto his shoulders, and took her home. His apartment was 2 blocks from the market, in an old building where he'd lived for 10 years. It was just 2 small rooms, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom, but it was home. "We'll figure things out tomorrow," he said, improvising a bed on the couch for the girl. The next morning, Frank woke up early as usual and found Star already awake, sitting on the couch, looking out the window. She hadn't said a word since he'd found her. "Good morning, Star," he said, heading to the kitchen to make coffee. "You're coming with me to the market today." The girl followed him to the kitchen and watched his every move. Frank made her a banana smoothie and drank his usual black coffee. On the way to the market, Frank tried talking to Star, but she just listened. He started to suspect she might have trouble speaking. At the market, Star sat in a plastic chair beside Frank's stall and observed everything. Other vendors began asking about her. "Who's the girl, Frank?" asked Mrs. Jenkins, who sold vegetables at the next stall. "Found her last night, abandoned," Frank replied, showing her the paper. "No name, nothing." Mrs. Jenkins, a 65-year-old woman who'd known Frank for over 15 years, was outraged. "How could anyone do such a thing? A child with no name, good Lord in heaven." "I've been thinking about what to do," said Frank. "I can't keep her, I don't have the means." "You should take her to Child Services," suggested old Tom, who sold fish at the stall across from him. Frank knew that was the right thing to do, but every time he looked at Star, he felt he couldn't hand her over to strangers. The little girl had grown attached to him in a way that touched his heart. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. That morning, Frank watched how Star reacted to people. She hid behind him whenever someone approached, but seemed relaxed when they were alone. It was as if she trusted only him. Around noon, an elegant woman approached the stall. It was Susan Parker, a social worker from the city office who made regular rounds at the farmer's market. "Frank, I heard you found a child," she said, eyeing Star with professional concern. "Found her last night," Frank confirmed, showing her the note. She was abandoned. Susan read the note and shook her head sadly. I'll have to take her with me. She needs to be registered and placed under official care. Wait a minute, Frank pleaded, noticing Star hiding behind his leg. She's fine with me. Frank, you know you can't keep her like this. There are procedures to follow. Just a few more days. Let me try talking to her, figuring things out. Susan hesitated. She'd known Frank for years and trusted he was a good man, but the rules were clear. 3 days, she finally said. If you don't bring her to the office by Friday, I'll have to take action. After Susan left, Frank crouched beside Star. Don't worry, little one, I'll find a way. But inside he was desperate. He knew his finances didn't allow him to properly care for a child. He barely made enough to cover rent and food. That afternoon, Frank decided to learn more about Star's past. He walked her around the farmer's market, showing her every stall and asking vendors if they'd seen her before. Never seen her around, said Mrs. Wilson, who sold second-hand clothes. Me neither, confirmed Mr. Peterson from the butcher shop. Then they reached Mrs. Thompson's stall, a 70-year-old woman who sold medicinal herbs and knew everything happening in the area. Oh, I've seen this girl before, Mrs. Thompson said, studying Star carefully. She used to walk around the church square with a thin woman, long hair, about 2 weeks ago. Frank's heart raced. Finally, a lead. What woman? Do you know her? Not personally, but I've seen her around a few times. She seemed lost, you know, like she was struggling. Do you know where she lives? No, son. But if you want, I can ask my granddaughter. She knows everyone around here. Frank thanked her and left with a glimmer of hope. Maybe he could find the person who'd abandoned Star and understand why. The next day, Friday, Mrs. Thompson returned with news. My granddaughter said the woman's name is Amber. She was renting a small room behind Mrs. Cooper's house on Blossom Street. Frank felt a mix of hope and dread. Should he look for this Amber? What if she wanted Star back? What if she was dangerous? I'll go talk to her, Frank decided. Be careful, son, Mrs. Thompson warned. Sometimes it's best to leave things as they are. But Frank had already made up his mind. He closed his stall early and took Star to Blossom Street. Mrs. Cooper's house was modest with a peeling green iron gate. Excuse me, Frank called out. A grey-haired woman appeared at the window. What can I do for you? I'm looking for a woman named Amber. I heard she lived here. Amber left about a week ago, replied Mrs. Cooper, coming down to open the gate. Why do you ask? Frank explained the situation and showed Star to her. Mrs. Cooper put her hand on her chest and widened her eyes. Oh my lord, so that's what happened. I knew there was something strange going on. What do you mean? Amber had lived here for about 2 months. She arrived with the girl, said she was her daughter. But I always had my doubts. The child didn't look like her and never called her Mom. Frank felt each word like a punch to the gut. Do you know where she went? I don't, no. One night she just vanished, left her things in the room and disappeared. I thought she'd taken the girl with her. What kind of person was this Amber? A bit odd, always seemed nervous, like she was running from something. Sometimes she'd get calls and get all worked up. Frank thanked her for the information and went back home with Star. Now he had more questions than answers. Who was this child really? Why had Amber abandoned her? And more importantly, what should he do now? That night, as Star slept on the couch, Frank kept thinking about the whole situation. He'd grown attached to the girl in a way he hadn't expected. Seeing her smile when she ate a piece of fruit, the way she clung to his leg when she was scared, it all stirred feelings he didn't even know he had. Frank had never married or had children. He'd always been focused on work, just trying to get by day after day. But now, with Star here, he felt a different purpose in life. On Saturday morning, Susan showed up at the farmer's market. Frank, where's the girl? You promised you'd bring her yesterday. I found out some things about her, Frank said, telling her about Amber and Mrs. Cooper. That doesn't change anything. You're not in a position to take care of her. What if I get in a position? Susan sighed. Frank, be realistic. You can barely support yourself. A child needs so much more than you can give. Then help me figure out how to provide it. How? I don't know yet, but there has to be a way. Susan looked at Star, who was sitting in her little chair, arranging the smaller fruits in rows. She really doesn't say anything. Not a word. But she understands everything we say. Could be trauma. Sometimes kids stop talking when they go through really hard times. Frank's heart clenched even tighter. What had this child been through to end up like this? Give me a week, Frank pleaded. Just one more week to try and sort this out. Susan glanced around, seeing how the other vendors watched the girl with affection, how she seemed to fit right into that environment. 1 week, she finally agreed. But after that, I won't be able to delay any longer. Over the weekend, Frank thought hard about what to do. He talked to Mrs. Jenkins, Old Tom, and other vendors about the situation. They all liked Star, but no one had a practical solution. The problem is money, said Mrs. Jenkins. If you had a way to support her properly, you'd be the ideal father. But I don't, Frank admitted. I can barely pay my rent. What if we all pitched in, suggested Old Tom. I won't take charity, Frank said proudly. It's not charity, it's solidarity, Mrs. Jenkins corrected. We all want to help. But Frank knew a collection would only be a temporary fix. He needed something more permanent. On Monday, while setting up his stall, Frank had an idea. What if he expanded his business? Maybe he could get a better spot at the market, sell more varieties of fruit, increase his income. He went to talk to the market manager, Mr. Johnson, about the possibility. Frank, you know there's a huge waiting list for better spots, said Mr. Johnson, and even if there weren't, you'd have to show proof of income to qualify. But what if I found a partner, someone with more money? Then it'd be different. But who'd want to partner with a vendor at the farmer's market? Frank returned to his stall feeling discouraged. It seemed like every door was closing on him. That's when a well-dressed man in a suit and tie appeared, carefully inspecting the fruit. Your mangoes look wonderful, the man said. Where do you get them? Directly from the grower in Fresno, Frank replied. I go there twice a week. Interesting. I own a chain of markets in the area. Maybe we could do business. Frank's heart raced. Could this be the opportunity he'd been waiting for? What kind of business? You could supply me with premium fruit. I'd pay better than the farmer's market rate, but I'd demand consistent quality. How much better? The man, who introduced himself as Richard Brown, did some quick math and showed Frank the number. It was nearly double what he usually made. But there are conditions, Richard said. You'd need an EIN, issue invoices, guarantee regular deliveries. Frank felt the ground slip from under him. All these requirements seemed impossible. I don't know if I can manage all that, he admitted. Think it over, Richard said, handing him a card. It's a good opportunity. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now continuing. That night, Frank talked to Star about the offer, even though he knew she wouldn't answer. What do you think, little one? Is it worth trying? Star looked at him with her big, serious eyes as if understanding the weight of the moment. Frank decided to seek help. He went to the Vendors Association, where he got information on how to get an EIN and formalize his business. He learned he'd need an accountant, paperwork, and an initial investment he didn't have. Just as he was about to give up, Mrs. Jenkins showed up at his house on Tuesday night. Frank, we need to talk, she said gravely. What is it, Mrs. Jenkins? It's about Star. I've been thinking a lot, and I have a proposal. Frank's heart pounded. What proposal? My husband and I are retired. We have a big house, no children. How about we adopt her? The world seemed to stop for Frank. Part of him knew this would be best for Star, but another part shattered at the thought. You can give her more than I can, he admitted, swallowing the lump in his throat. It's what's best for her, Frank, you know that. Can I still see her? Of course. You'll always be special to her. Frank looked at Star, who was drawing on the couch. How could he be so selfish to keep her when others could offer so much more? Let me think about it till tomorrow, he said. Mrs. Jenkins nodded and left, leaving Frank in terrible anguish. By Wednesday, Frank was torn between accepting Mrs. Jenkins' offer or trying something with Richard Brown. He decided to call the businessman and explain his situation. "Listen, Frank," Richard said over the phone, "I like the quality of your fruit. How about this? You find a partner with money to handle the paperwork, and I'll guarantee contracts for a year." "But where would I find a partner?" "That's on you. The offer stands till Friday." Frank hung up even more confused. He had until Thursday to figure everything out before Susan came back for Star. Then a desperate idea struck him. What if he tracked down Amber, the woman who'd abandoned Star? Maybe she knew something about the girl's real family. He went back to Mrs. Cooper's house to try and get more information. "Did Amber leave anything behind in the room? Any documents?" "She did. I even kept them thinking she'd come back." Mrs. Cooper brought out a bag with some old clothes and a small address book. Frank flipped through the address book and found some names and phone numbers. "Can I jot down these contacts?" "You can take the book. If she comes back, I'll explain." Frank spent the afternoon calling the numbers in the book. Most didn't answer or didn't know Amber, but on the last number, a woman picked up. "Amber? Oh, honey, she's in the hospital." Frank's heart nearly stopped. "Where?" "At Mercy Medical Center. She had a really bad nervous breakdown. She's been there a week." Frank got the room number and went to the hospital with Star on Thursday morning. He found a thin woman with long hair, just as Mrs. Thompson had described. "Amber!" The woman looked up, and when she saw Star, she started crying uncontrollably. "I knew you'd show up," she said between sobs. "I couldn't take care of her." "Why did you abandon her?" "Because she's not my daughter," Amber confessed. "I found her in a park 3 months ago, abandoned too." Frank felt the world spin. "What do you mean?" "She was alone, crying, with a dirty diaper. No one was around. I took her home, tried to care for her, but I can't. I don't have a home, a job, nothing." "Why didn't you seek official help?" "Because I'm scared of the police. I've had some trouble with drugs and I thought they'd arrest me." Frank looked at Star, who watched everything in silence. That child had been abandoned twice. "Do you know where she originally came from?" "No. When I found her, she only had a diaper and a note that said, 'Take good care of her.' Nothing else." "And why didn't you say that in the note you left?" "I was in really bad shape, confused. I just wanted someone to care for her better than I could." Frank left the hospital with more questions than answers. Now he knew Star had been abandoned not once, but twice, and he still had no idea who her real parents were. It was Thursday afternoon, and Susan would arrive Friday morning to pick up Star. Frank had less than 24 hours to figure everything out. He decided to try one last move. He called Richard Brown and set up an urgent meeting. "Richard, I need a partnership today. Do you know anyone who could be my partner?" "Frank, it doesn't work like that. A partnership takes trust, planning." "I know, but I'm desperate. It's about the girl living with me." Frank told Richard the whole story, and Richard was moved by the situation. "Look, I have a brother who's retired and has some money saved. I can talk to him, but I can't promise anything. Please, it's my last chance." Richard called his brother right in front of Frank. The conversation lasted 15 minutes, and Frank could only catch a few words. "He's in," Richard said, hanging up. "But he wants to meet you and the girl first." "When?" "Now. He's on his way." Half an hour later, a well-dressed man in his 60s with a kind face arrived. "I'm Joseph Brown," he said, shaking Frank's hand. "Richard told me your story." Frank introduced Star, who, as usual, hid behind his leg. "She's very shy," Frank explained. "Understandable after what she's been through," Joseph said, crouching to her level. "Hi, Star. How are you?" To everyone's surprise, Star nodded and didn't hide. "Interesting," Joseph murmured. "She has very intelligent eyes." "So what do you think of the proposal?" Richard asked. "I'll be straight," Joseph said. "I'm not interested in making money from fruit. but I am interested in helping a child. I'll join the partnership if Frank guarantees he'll use the money to take good care of her. Frank felt tears in his eyes. I guarantee. It's all I want. Then let's get the paperwork done today. I know an accountant who can handle everything in a few hours. They spent the rest of the afternoon at notaries and offices. By 8 that night, Frank had his EIN, his business registered, and a signed supply contract with Richard. Now you're in a position to keep her, said Joseph, smiling. But Frank knew he still had to convince Susan the next morning. Early on Friday, Susan arrived at the farmer's market as promised. Frank, don't tell me you still haven't sorted things out. I have, said Frank, showing all the documents. Now I have a business, proven income, and the means to care for her. Susan examined the papers carefully. This is impressive, Frank, but still, you're single. You have no experience with children. He won't be alone, interrupted Mrs. Jenkins, who had just arrived. Everyone at the market will help take care of Star. It's true, confirmed old Tom. That girl is already our mascot. Susan looked around and saw all the vendors nodding. Star was in the middle of them, finally smiling openly. Even so, there's the legal matter. She has no documents. We don't know who her parents are. We can get the documents, said Frank. Register her as my adopted daughter. It's not that simple. Susan, interrupted Mrs. Thompson, arriving with a folder in hand. I brought something that might interest you. She opened the folder and showed a newspaper clipping from 3 months ago. Remember, I said I'd seen the girl before. Well, I asked my granddaughter to research local newspapers. Look at this. The headline read, "Family searches for daughter missing in bus accident." Frank read the article with his heart racing. A family from Pasadena had lost their 5-year-old daughter in a bus accident that happened exactly 3 months ago. The child had a star-shaped birthmark on her right arm. It's her, whispered Frank, looking at the mark on Star's arm. Susan took the newspaper and read it carefully. According to this, the parents are Daniel and Jennifer Wilson. They live in Highland Park. Frank felt his world collapse. After everything he'd been through, Star had a family looking for her. We'll have to contact them, said Susan. I know, murmured Frank, holding the girl's hand. It's the right thing to do. But inside he was shattered. He'd grown attached to Star in a way he never thought possible. Susan called the number in the newspaper. A woman answered, crying when she heard they had news about her daughter. We're coming right now, said the voice on the phone. I can't believe our Emma is alive. Emma, so that was Star's real name. An hour later, a desperate couple arrived at the market. The woman, Jennifer, began to cry when she saw the girl. Emma, my baby. But to everyone's surprise, the girl didn't react. She looked at her parents with the same frightened expression she'd had when she first met Frank. She doesn't recognize you, observed Susan. It could be the trauma, explained Daniel, the father. In the accident, she hit her head. Maybe she has amnesia. Frank watched the scene with a broken heart. He could see these people loved the girl, but she clearly didn't remember them. Emma, it's me, Mommy, said Jennifer, approaching slowly. The girl hid behind Frank, as she always did when scared. She trusts you, Daniel said to Frank. How did you manage that? I was just kind to her, replied Frank, stroking the girl's hair. How long has she been with you? A week. And in a week, you've made more progress than the doctors in 3 months, murmured Jennifer. What do you mean? Emma was hospitalized before the accident. She had emotional problems, didn't speak to anyone. The accident made everything worse. Frank began to understand. The girl had issues before she was abandoned. Maybe that's why she didn't react to her parents. Can I suggest something? Said Frank hesitantly. Of course, replied Daniel. What if you visited her here a few times before taking her, so she can get used to you slowly? Jennifer and Daniel exchanged glances. That makes sense, agreed Jennifer. We don't want to traumatize her even more. Susan, who had been observing everything, chimed in. It's a good idea. We can do a supervised adjustment period. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Jennifer visited Emma every day at the farmer's market. Gradually, the little girl grew accustomed to them. Frank helped with the transition, always there to reassure her. You're an angel, Jennifer told Frank after 2 weeks. "You took care of her better than we ever could." "You're her parents," Frank replied. "I was just lending some love." But inside, each day was agony. He knew he would soon lose the girl he had learned to love like a daughter. It was during the 3rd week that something unexpected happened. Emma finally spoke. "Frank," she said, clear as day. Everyone froze in shock. It was the first word she had spoken since the accident. "She said my name," Frank whispered, overcome. "Frank," Emma repeated, squeezing his hand. Jennifer burst into tears. She spoke, after months of silence. In the days that followed, Emma began speaking more, always addressing Frank first, then her parents. It was as if he were her bridge to the world. "Daddy Frank," she said one day, startling everyone. "I think she's confused about who's who," Susan explained. But Frank knew it wasn't confusion. To Emma, he had truly become a father, and the Wilsons were starting to understand that too. "Frank," Daniel said one Thursday, "Jennifer and I have talked a lot. We want to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" "We want you to stay in Emma's life, as a godfather, a special uncle. You gave us our daughter back. We don't want to lose you too." Frank was overwhelmed. He wouldn't have to choose between his love for Emma and doing what was right. "It would be an honor," he answered, tears in his eyes. "Daddy Frank," Emma said, hugging his leg. "Stay with me?" "I'll always stay with you, Star," he said, using the name he'd given her. "I mean, Emma, I like Star too," she said, smiling. "Then you have 2 names," Jennifer said, laughing through tears. "Emma at home, Star here at the market." In the months that followed, they settled into a special routine. Emma lived with her parents, but spent every afternoon at the market with Frank. He taught her about fruit, about life, about kindness. She taught him about unconditional love. Frank's business thrived with Joseph's partnership. He rented a bigger apartment and even considered moving closer to the Wilson family. "You don't have to," Daniel said. "We're thinking of moving nearer to the market. Emma gets so anxious when she has to wait to see you." And so, the Wilsons rented a house just 3 blocks from the market. Emma walked back and forth on her own, running to hug Frank every afternoon. "Daddy Frank, I drew this for you," she'd say, showing off her artwork. "It gets more beautiful every day," he'd reply, pinning each drawing to a makeshift display at his stall. A year after the day he found her, Frank threw a party at the market to celebrate. All the vendors joined in. Emma's parents brought a cake, and Susan stopped by to see how things were going. "I've never seen a story with such a happy ending," Susan told Frank. "Ending?" Frank laughed. "This is just the beginning." Emma, now 6, climbed onto a crate at the stall and shouted to the whole market, "My daddy Frank is the best daddy in the world, and our Emma is the best daughter in the universe," Frank called back. Mrs. Jenkins wiped her eyes with her apron. "That girl has changed everyone here," she said. "Even old Tom has softened since she arrived." It was true. Emma had transformed the market's dynamic. Everyone treated her like a granddaughter, protecting her, spoiling her. It was impossible to walk through without seeing her darting between stalls, helping here and there, always with her bright, shining smile. "Frank," Jennifer said one evening, "Daniel and I want to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Would you be Emma's official godfather? At the wedding, she can walk you down the aisle along with me and Daniel." Frank was confused. "What wedding?" "Ours. We're getting married again to celebrate our family being reunited, and we want you to be an official part of the ceremony." On the wedding day, held in the little square next to the farmer's market, Emma wore a simple white dress and walked 2 people down the aisle, her mother Jennifer and her godfather Frank. Daniel waited at the altar with the priest. "Today we celebrate not just a wedding," the priest said, "but a family formed through love, loss, and reunion." During the ceremony, Emma wouldn't let go of Frank's hand. When it was time for the vows, Daniel asked to speak. "Jennifer, I promise to love you and our daughter forever. And Frank, I promise to share Emma with you for the rest of our lives, because we know love doesn't shrink when it's divided, it multiplies." There wasn't a dry eye in the square. After the ceremony, as everyone celebrated, Emma pulled Frank aside. Daddy Frank, are you really my official godfather now? I sure am, my little star. So you won't leave me anymore? Never again, I promise. I promise I'll never leave you either. Frank hugged her, overwhelmed with gratitude for this little girl who had come into his life nameless and given him a purpose he hadn't even known he was searching for. 2 years later, Frank and Emma had their own rituals. Every morning she helped set up the stall. Every afternoon he helped with her homework. Every evening he had dinner at the Wilsons' house. Have you noticed what a strange family we are? Jennifer would laugh. But it's ours. Emma, now 8, had become one of the most popular kids at school. She always told everyone about her godfather, the market vendor who had given her a name and a home when she had nothing. My godfather found me lost and taught me how to find myself, she wrote in her school essays. One day, a teacher asked to speak with Emma's parents. I'd love to understand her story better, the teacher said. She talks about her godfather with so much love. I'm curious. Daniel and Jennifer told the whole story, from the accident to the reunion. What an incredible journey, the teacher said. Emma is one of the most well-adjusted kids in class. It must be all that love she gets. She deserves it, Jennifer said. After everything she's been through, we make sure to make up for it now. And her godfather is still around. Every single day, Daniel laughed. Sometimes I think Emma likes him more than us. It was true. The bond between Frank and Emma was special, different from the love for her parents, but just as strong. They had their own codes, inside jokes and traditions only they understood. Every Friday, for example, Frank closed the stall early and took Emma for ice cream at the corner shop. It was their time alone, where they talked about everything: school, friends, dreams, fears. Daddy Frank, when I grow up, I want to work with you at the market, she said one Friday. You can work wherever you want, Star. You're smart enough for anything. But I like the market. I like the people, the fruit, everything. Then when you finish school, the stall will be waiting for you. Frank had started a savings account for Emma, depositing part of his profits every month. He wanted to make sure she had opportunities to study and choose her own path. One day you'll go to college, he told her. And will you come with me? Wherever you go, I'll be cheering for you. When Emma turned 10, Frank threw her a surprise party at the market. He decorated every stall with colorful banners and invited her whole class. Daddy Frank, you're the best godfather in the world, she shouted, hugging him in front of all their friends. And you're the sweetest-hearted daughter anyone could ask for, he replied. That day, as he watched Emma playing with her friends among the stalls of the farmer's market that had become her second home, Frank reflected on how much life had changed. 7 years ago, he was just a lonely vendor. Now, he had a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up every day with joy. "What's on your mind?" asked Mrs. Jenkins, noticing his thoughtful gaze. "Just remembering the day I found her right there," said Frank, pointing to the spot where he'd discovered Emma. "Who'd have thought a lost little girl would teach me so much about being found?" "I think you found each other," said Mrs. Jenkins, wise as ever. "That's true, she gave me a name too." "What do you mean?" "Before her, I was just Frank. Now I'm Papa Frank. It's a new identity, more important than the old one." Emma ran up to them, her face smeared with chocolate from the cake. "Papa Frank, all my friends want to see your stall." "Then let's give them a tour," he said, winking at Mrs. Jenkins. And off Frank went, showing 10 10-year-olds how to pick the best mango, how to tell if a banana is ripe, how to peel a pineapple. Emma followed proudly, adding to his explanations. "My godfather knows everything about fruit," she said. "He's the smartest at the market." By evening, when all the friends had gone, Emma helped Frank clean up the stall. "Papa Frank, thank you for the most beautiful party of my life. You deserve every party in the world, my little star. Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever miss having real kids?" Frank stopped what he was doing and looked at her carefully. "Emma, you are my real daughter. You might not have been born from me, but you were born in my heart, and that's the only truth that matters. So can I just call you Dad sometimes? You already call me Papa Frank. It's perfect like that. But what if I just say Dad sometimes?" It'd be the greatest honor of my life. That night, when Frank arrived at the Wilsons for dinner, Emma made an announcement. "Mom and Dad," she said, looking at Daniel and Jennifer, "I want you to know that Papa Frank is my dad too. I have 2 dads and 1 mom. I'm the luckiest kid in the world." Daniel and Jennifer smiled, having expected this moment. "We've always known," said Jennifer, "and we're happy you're sure of it too." "Frank," said Daniel, "officially, you're part of our family. You always have been, really." Frank felt an emotion he couldn't put into words. At 55, he'd found not just a daughter, but an entire family. "Thank you," he said simply, "for letting me be part of all this." "Thank you," said Jennifer, "for saving our daughter when we couldn't. For giving her what she needed most when she needed it most," Daniel added. Emma looked at the 3 adults she loved. "Can we eat now? I'm hungry and there's leftover cake from the party." Everyone laughed, and they dined as they did every night, like a family that had found each other in an unconventional way, but loved each other completely. Years later, when Emma was a teenager, she wrote a school essay about heroes. She chose to write about Frank. "My hero doesn't wear a cape or have superpowers. He wears a straw hat and sells fruit at a market. When I was little and lost, he found me. But really, I think we found each other. He taught me that family isn't just about blood, but about love. He taught me that a name isn't just a word, but a promise that you exist and matter. He taught me that kindness is the only thing that truly multiplies when you share it. My hero gave me a name when I didn't have one. But most importantly, it gave me a reason to be proud of this name." The teacher, moved, asked Emma to read her essay to the class. When she finished, the room fell silent. "Emma," said a classmate, "your godfather must be really special." "Yes," she replied, smiling, "and he doesn't even know how special he is. He thinks he just did what anyone would do, but that's not true. He did what only a real father would do." That afternoon, Emma rushed to the farmer's market as she always did after school. "Papa Frank," she called out, hugging him, "I wrote about you at school." "About me? Why?" "Because you're my hero." Frank felt his eyes well up, as they always did when Emma said things like that. "You're my hero, Star. You saved me just as much as I saved you." "How did I save you?" "You taught me that life has meaning when you have someone to love and care for. You taught me that being a father doesn't need paperwork, it just needs heart." Emma smiled and began arranging the fruit as she'd done since she was little. At 15, she already knew the business better than most adults. "Papa Frank, I still want to work with you when I grow up. And I'll still be here waiting for you, my girl." Because in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. They were father and daughter, bound not by chance, but by the love they chose to nurture every day since that Thursday, when a nameless girl met a man willing to give her everything she'd never had. The end. So what did you think of this touching story? Tell us in the comments which part moved your heart the most. Did Frank make the right choice fighting to stay with Emma? And did the girl's parents act wisely by welcoming him into the family? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story of love, loss, and reunion. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss more heartwarming stories.